A lot of firstborn daughters are either struggling in relationships right this moment as I speak, or they have a long trail of relationships that didn't work out. And the question is, why? It's not because as a firstborn daughter you're too much. It's not because you're masculine, as you've heard people say. It's not because you're controlling or intimidating or you're hard to love. It is because of how you were configured long before you ever chose love for yourself. This is what people call the eldest daughter syndrome, or the EDS. But it goes deeper than psychology, in my opinion. It's more spiritual, more emotional, and more generational than you ever think. Firstborn daughters were trained to become leaders long before they were taught how to rest. Most of us didn't get the luxury of being children. Just being a child and playful and all that. No, we didn't get that. From a very young age, we were the little helpers at home. Learned how to step in when our parents were tired. We learned how to manage people's emotions, our parents included. We learned how to protect our siblings. We learned how to carry responsibility that did not belong to us. We had to become the strong ones far too early. And so by the time you as a firstborn daughter is entering marriage or a long-term relationship, you don't come in as someone learning how to build a home. You come in as someone who already knows how to run a home. It's not natural for you as a firstborn daughter to be held, poured into, or taken care of. What feels natural is you holding things together. And so you come in ready to run that home, not to learn how to build it. And because of that configuration, you often attract men who want to be held more than they want to hold things down for you.
There is a very specific strange phenomenon that exists in a lot of households. A little girl is born, and somehow, before she's old enough to vote, drive, or pay taxes, she's already learning how to take care of grown men and growing boys. Maybe you've seen this before in your own life or in the houses of people you know. The daughter instinctively clears the table while her brother stays seated. The daughter is told to help in the kitchen while the boys watch television. The daughter is expected to know where everybody's things are, or she's called from another room to help a grown man find something that is sitting directly in front of him. Nobody calls it labor, they call it being helpful. They say she's responsible, that she's mature for her age, that she's such a good girl. But what if that's not maturity? What if that's labor? The older I get, the more I notice something strange. In many families, mothers aren't just raising daughters, they're recruiting assistants. They're training daughters to help manage the emotional, domestic, and social responsibilities of every man in the house. We've stopped raising girls and started raising future wives. And sometimes, the daughter isn't being prepared for adulthood, she's being prepared for a husband by practicing on her family. Think about how a daughter actually becomes the default household manager. Nobody officially assigns her the role. There's no family meeting where she gets promoted. It just slowly, quietly accumulates until she becomes a relationship manager and an emotional buffer before she even knows what a relationship is. A buffer is something that absorbs impact, so two distinct forces don't have to collide directly. Many daughters spend years acting as emotional shock absorbers for the entire house. Mom is angry with dad, send the daughter. Dad is in a bad mood, tell the daughter to go talk to him. A brother is being irresponsible, ask the daughter to step in and fix it. Notice how often she becomes the bridge connecting everyone else, expected to soften conflicts and translate emotions. The family slowly begins treating her emotional labor as a natural resource, something that is always available and something that costs nothing. But emotional labor is never free. She is paying for that harmony with her own nervous system. She learns to read facial expressions before words. She learns to detect shifting moods before anyone speaks. Later in life, people will call this female intuition. Sometimes it's not intuition at all. Sometimes it's a childhood survival skill. Psychologists have a word for this: parentification. It happens when a child starts carrying emotional or domestic responsibilities that belong entirely to adults. We meet a 10-year-old girl and say she is wise beyond her years, but what we are actually praising is self-erasure. She internalizes a simple, dangerous lesson that the more useful you are, the more lovable you become. Think about how powerful that lesson really is. Because children don't just learn rules, they learn identity. A little girl who is repeatedly rewarded for anticipating needs doesn't just learn how to help people, she learns that helping people is who she is. A little girl who is constantly praised for being easy, agreeable, and self sacrificing doesn't just learn good behavior. She learns that her comfort matters less than everybody else's. Over time, usefulness stops being something she does and starts becoming something she is. And that's what makes this dynamic so difficult to recognize later in life. Because by the time she becomes an adult, it is no longer labor, it feels like personality.
A lot of times, the eldest daughter, she doesn't get a childhood, she just gets responsibilities. So when others are worrying about homework and friendships, you're just worrying about whether mom was okay, whether the bills would get paid, whether your siblings ate, whether the house would be peaceful when dad gets home. And let me explain what that does to your developing brain. Children are supposed to experience what's called serve and return interactions. So you express a need and a caretaker, like a parent, meet it. And then that's how your nervous system learns safety. But for you, it was reversed. So you do all of the serving, you're meeting everyone else's needs. Your brain never gets the signal that it's okay to relax. And that's called a hypervigilant nervous system, or reticular activating system, the part of your brainstem that controls alertness, that gets stuck in the on position. So you become hyper aware. You notice micro expressions. If someone's tone shifts, if someone's energy shifts in the room. And that's not intuition. It's actually a trauma adaptation, because your nervous system, it learned that it has to depend on predicting other people's emotions before they even know what they're feeling. So you become hypervigilant, not mature for your age. And now you walk into every room, you're still scanning, you're still monitoring, you're still waiting for the next thing that you need to fix. And so everyone thinks that, hey, that's just a personality trait. That's just who she is. But that's actually your nervous system still trying to keep you safe in the only way that it knows how.
But this household training ground doesn't exist in a vacuum. Every lesson taught to a daughter is simultaneously teaching a son something else. While the daughter is pushed toward constant hypervigilance, the son is allowed to exist simply. We've all seen it. His mess, his emotional outbursts, his lack of domestic awareness. It's all dismissed with a casual shrug and he's just a boy. His childlike behavior is protected while her childhood is cut short. When she wants to just play or rest, she is corrected with, "You're old enough to know better. Go help your brother." If daughters are expected to serve, sons are being taught to expect service. If daughters are trained to anticipate needs, sons learn to expect care without a plugged in awareness of how much work goes into providing it. They learn to assume that someone else will always handle the logistics of their lives. And right here lies a cruel irony: the competence trap. In most families, when a child is unreliable, expectations are lowered. When a child is reliable, they are raised. The organized daughter gets more tasks. The emotionally mature daughter gets heavier emotional burdens. Competence becomes a punishment. We leave our daughters exhausted by responsibility and our sons completely inequipped for it. The capable child almost always grows into the invisible, exhausted woman.
I'm an eldest daughter, and I've just come to the realization that I don't want to have kids. So I made a post on Threads asking if there were other eldest, firstborn, or parentified women out there who have decided not to have kids. And it got a lot of interaction. And the common reason why is because they felt like they paid their dues. They were mothers involuntarily as children, and they don't want to have kids now. And it's the same thing with me. Eldest of 7, raised my siblings. The traumas that they have in their life are directed towards me. We've done a lot of work to heal all of that. But I've had to bear the brunt of being a mother without making the choice myself. So the thought of starting again, it's a lot. And I'd rather have the second part of my life not having children. And I wanted to do this video because one of the women in my community asked for coaching around her struggles with wanting to fulfill familiar expectations whilst honoring herself and wanting that break. And when I shared that I had just made the decision, she didn't feel alone. So I suspect that there are other firstborn daughters out there who might be struggling with their decision, have made the decision, and they don't realize that there are a lot of other women that can relate and feel like they are empty nesters and they don't want to start again. And you're not alone. I don't blame you. So for those people who have people in their lives, it's been a struggle for some of my friends and some of my family members to accept my position, but they don't understand my experience because they haven't lived it. So if you're watching this as someone who knows an eldest daughter that has made the same decision, she's tired. She's tired to her core. So she doesn't want to start again, and that should be okay.
What fascinates me about this dynamic is how quickly we stop seeing it as labor and start seeing it as a personality. Think about the traits we traditionally associate with femininity: being nurturing, being patient, being accommodating, being emotionally aware, being selfless, being a good listener. None of those traits are inherently bad. The real question is, why do we assume girls should develop them earlier, more intensely, and at a greater personal cost than boys? Because a lot of what we call femininity is actually unpaid labor that has become so normalized we no longer recognize it as work. When a woman remembers everyone else's birthday, that's labor. When she notices tension in a room and adjusts her behavior accordingly, that's labor. When she manages complex family dynamics or anticipates needs before anyone has time to ask, that's labor. The labor becomes invincible. Then the invisibility becomes femininity. And once something becomes an intrinsic part of femininity, it stops looking optional. This is why women are often praised for things that sound suspiciously like unpaid work. She's so nurturing, she's so selfless, she's so emotionally intelligent, she's so giving. Again, none of these traits are bad. The question is why we celebrate them most when they benefit other people. Notice how rarely women are praised for protecting their own time, prioritizing their own needs, or refusing unreasonable demands. The ideal woman is often imagined as someone who gives endlessly. The ideal man is often imagined as someone who achieves endlessly. Even our compliments reveal what we expect from each gender.
In most African households, girls are not just raised, they are trained from a very young age. Sit properly, how to cook, how to welcome visitors, how to be respectful to your husband and your in-laws. So they're already prepared for the future. An average 14-year-old South Sudanese girl can cook and run a whole house and knows what to do anytime. On the other hand, we have the boy child who will be excused for everything, where they'll say the boys will be boys, boys will learn. Boys are not taught how to be respectful to their wives or how to treat their families well. So in the long run, we have unprepared boys. Even most boys don't know how to clean up after themselves because they are used to their sisters and their mothers doing that for them. So in the long run, we have very good wives that we have trained. However, we haven't done the same thing for the boys. So in marriages, we do have a very big imbalance where women are taking on more duties.
A lot of African moms train their daughters to be male-centered because that's how they grew up. Like in their times, you know, having a husband was seen as like you made it. Like a woman's goal, the only goal for you as a woman was to have a husband. But now a woman can be educated, a woman can go to school, they're independent, they do their own thing, they make their own money, but they still hold on to those things like, oh, you need to do this like this? Are you gonna go cook like this in your husband's house? Oh, your bed is not made. Are you gonna go to your husband's house and not make your bed? They need to let go of that, because you just need to stop training your daughters. Teach your daughters to grow up, just be basic human beings. Stop telling them, oh, you need to do this, because that's not how you're gonna go do at your husband's house. Like, we need to let that go. I know it's hard, but
It is incredibly easy to look at this dynamic and blame mothers. It's easy to call them complicit, but that misses the entire psychological weight of what's happening. Mothers are not the villains in this story. They are the projects of our system. Historically, women survived through men. For generations, a woman's social status, her economic stability, and her literal physical safety depended entirely on her ability to maintain a relationship with her husband. Under those conditions, teaching a daughter how to accommodate male moods and manage male convenience wasn't cruel. It was practical wisdom. It was an act of maternal protection. A mother was looking at her daughter and thinking, if you do not learn how to serve and placate the men in your life, the world will punish you. But there is even a deeper, more uncomfortable layer to this: generational trauma and respectability. Many women grew up under the heavy weight of the good girl blueprint. They suffered, they sacrificed, and they erased their own needs to keep their families intact. When you have paid such a high price to survive a system, it is psychologically terrifying to watch your daughter simply refuse to pay it. When a daughter sets boundaries, when she asks why her brothers aren't helping, it feels like a rejection of the mother's entire life choices. So the mother enforces the rules she was broken by. When she says, pick up after brother, or don't upset your father, you know how he gets. She is passing down the architecture of adaptation. She is training her daughter for a world she still believes requires female compliance to stay safe.
Women don't mature sooner than men do. They are literally forced to grow up a lot faster than men are. Those two are not the same thing. There is a huge difference, especially among the Hispanic communities. Women at a young age, as little girls, are taught to cook, they're taught to clean, they're taught how to stabilize everyone's emotions. They are taught to put everyone else before themselves. So when it comes to self-love, a lot of women grow up foreign to that concept and idea because they were never taught as little girls to love themselves. And what happens with the boys? Usually it's the exact opposite. They are coddled by the mother, by the aunts, by the father, by the sisters themselves. So they're never really ever forced or inclined to mature. That is exactly why a lot of men grow up and they are still in a state of emotional immaturity. Make sure your brother does this, make sure your brother does that, make sure your brother has this, make sure your father has this. Little girls are always conditioned to put everyone else literally before themselves. And that is exactly what makes them mature faster. I don't even like to call it maturing because it's quite literally forcing to grow up at an unhealthy rate. This is exactly why some women enter adulthood thinking it's their job to be the nurturers and the caretakers of every single person within that household, because all this shit comes from early childhood indoctrination through childhood, infancy, up until the teenage years, and they take all these things into adulthood. And it's sad because in some cases these women never got to experience childhood for what it was because they were too busy being the caretakers of everyone else, playing that parent role since their parents were not there to nurture them and love them the way that they should have. Being forced to grow up because of your circumstances and cultural norms of familial pressure is a lot different than maturing at a faster rate. And most women don't mature faster, they're just forced to grow up a lot quicker than men are.
Because of this deeply ingrained training, we find that daughters are often expected to age out of childhood responsibilities, but they never actually age out of family responsibilities. The son becomes an adult, and he is largely allowed to step away and simply participate in the family when it's convenient. The daughter, however, becomes a permanent extension of the household infrastructure. Even after she moves out, even after she gets married, even after she has a career or children of her own, she remains the default emergency contact. She is the organizer, the mediator, the caretaker, the family historian. She is the person who coordinates holiday dinners, the person who calls aging relatives, the person who notices when something is quietly wrong. She is expected to continue managing family relationships long after everyone else has been permitted to simply show up to them. This is why so many adult daughters describe feeling a profound, deep-seated tiredness that they cannot fully explain. They aren't just tired from their day jobs, they are carrying responsibilities that don't have names. scattered across dozens of tiny invisible tasks. None of them seem large individually. Together, they become a mandatory second job. The real test of any family system is what happens when someone finally refuses their assigned role. Most families don't actually notice the massive amount of labor an adult daughter is performing until she stops performing it. The moment she sets a boundary, everyone suddenly notices. Not because she started causing problems, but because she stopped solving them. The daughter who finally says no is almost always accused of changing, of becoming selfish, or of becoming difficult. But what has actually changed is that everyone else is now being forced to carry the structural and emotional weight she was carrying for them. A lot of women discovered this late in adulthood. The fastest way to identify the invisible role you've been assigned is to stop performing it. And what exactly who becomes upset? Systems built on invisible labor only become visible when the labor disappears. For example, a daughter who sacrifices her time and comfort is praised for being selfless and good, okay? But when she stops, she's labeled selfish and difficult. Or a daughter who acts as the family buffer is praised for being mature and intuitive, but when she stops, she's cold and divisive. When she carries this layout into her adult romance, she immediately becomes the default project manager for a grown man or her husband. She overextends until resentment appears, and resentment is always the bill for unpaid emotional labor. Somewhere right now, there's a little girl clearing plates while her brothers play. Somebody will call her mature, somebody will call her responsible, somebody will call her a good daughter, but nobody will ask why she's working while her little brothers are still allowed to be children. Helping your family is not the problem. Loving your parents and siblings is not the problem. The problem begins when a child becomes responsible for the physical convenience and emotional well-being of the adults around her. It begins when self-sacrifice becomes a personality trait instead of an occasional act of love. When labor is disguised as love, people stop tracking how much they are giving, and that most successful form of labor is the labor that convinces the worker it is love. A daughter should not have to earn her place in the family through service. She should not have to become useful before she becomes valuable. A woman's worth was never supposed to come from how much she can carry for the men in her lives. The strange thing about this system is that it doesn't just shape daughters, it shapes even the expectation of women. The daughter who learns to serve becomes the woman everyone expects to serve. And because she has been praised for carrying so much for so long, people forget she was carrying it at all. Because being a good daughter should never require becoming somebody else's wife before you've even had the chance to become yourself.
If you are the first daughter in an African or an Asian household, I have a book for you. The first is My Sister, the Serial Killer. So in this book, we follow Korede, whose younger sister, Ayola, is a serial killer. Yeah. So, her younger sister is more of the charismatic one. Everybody loves her. Everybody adores her. And then we have, Korede, who's like the complete opposite of her. But to make it even worse, all Ayola's mistakes that she makes, her murders, Korede is the one who cleans up her messes, her younger sister's messes, both literally and figuratively. And throughout this entire book, I really wanted just one person to give this character a hug, because I just felt her emotions, like having all these responsibilities, on her. Even with the flashbacks, there were certain things where it was like Ayola would do this, or she would make a mistake, or she wouldn't be good at this, and automatically it was Korede's fault. And I just feel like every single first daughter can relate to this, being, responsible for your younger siblings' actions to the point where you're basically their parents. So, yeah. The second book is I Wish We Weren't Related. This book is so messy. There's a lot of drama going on. So it follows River, who is the first daughter out of three girls. And, in the novel, River's ex basically cheats on her with her youngest sister, and her other sister helps them do it. So yeah, it is extremely messy. There is so much going on in this book, and despite it all, there is just this pressure that her sisters and keep putting on her, like, oh, you were meant to be there for us. They blame her for a lot of things, and it was just very painful to read this, because this is her going through all this mess in her personal life, and then she's still expected to be, she tries to be the perfect daughter, the perfect person as her career, and still, picking up the slacks for her siblings. And they have such a complicated relationship, but throughout the entire book, we just see her journey through, healing, putting boundaries for herself, being there for herself first, and the character development that we sort of have here with Riva, we don't really see it here with the first character. In this novel, but I think both of these books really just exemplifies and talk about the concept of being the eldest daughter, having all that responsibility and just trying to be your best and be there for your younger siblings, even to your detriment, so